coast in the far north of Western Australia is a wild, dangerous place where few people ever go. Huge, relentless tides surge between the rocky islands and over the coral reefs. And the fishing is spectacular.
See you later, mate.
Malcolm Douglas, based on his crocodile farm in Broome, spends long periods exploring this remote part of Australia. These expeditions are rough, tough, and often dangerous. Come along as he sets out on another remarkable adventure. Malcolm's heading 200 kilometres north from Broome up the Dampier Peninsula to launch his boat at One Arm Point. The Kimberley is a vast mass of uplifted sandstone, eroded by spectacular gorges. Only the most experienced travellers can take on the extreme conditions of this wild corner of Australia, with its huge rise and fall of tide, conflicting currents, countless islands and uncharted reefs. For Malcolm, it's a challenge. He knows this coast well. With a mate or two and his dog Bundy, he'll live for weeks on the sandy beaches and rocky outcrops. This time he's heading for a particular bay. It's impossible to find without detailed local knowledge. The boat has to be manoeuvred through the deeper channels on the dropping tide to a point where the water spills from the higher reef.
Now up on the reef in front of me where that waterfall is, where we just came in and put the boat down, is a large area where the water gets trapped on the reef at low tide. And in this waterhole, all the fish congregate, and it is one of the best fishing spots that I know. In a few minutes, I'll just walk up here and I'll show you what Kimberley fishing is all about. Just down in front of me there are schools of golden trevally, jack, flag, you name it, I've got them here. I only get half a dozen fish here, and then all the others will clear out because they'll get spooked, but we only need 3 or 4 for feed. Just teeny looking, I can see all around me. Right over, give it a bit of a flick. I've got a popping lure. It'll spin, it'll go along the surface to show you what fishing's all about. Second cast, 30 seconds of fishing, already got my dinner. That's what Kimberley fishing is all about. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Come on, hey, come back here. Let him go, I'll get another one.
Malcolm enjoys trying out different kinds of lures. many of them handmade by mates. When the rising tide pushes across the reef, it's time to go. The sea is calm between the islands strung out along the Kimberley coast, ideal for travelling long distances. Boats rarely venture into landlocked Secure Bay. It's too remote, a dangerous place of cross currents and whirlpools stirred up by the funneling tide. For years, governments have discussed how this extraordinary power might be harnessed for electricity.
That's really awesome, isn't it? This is the main entrance into Secure Bay, and this is quite different to all the other tidal gorges I've been to over the years. It's in a very remote place, right up on the top of the Kimberleys at the bottom of Collier Bay. And a lot of bureaucrats over the years have had this dream of damming this and using the power of the tide to turn turbines to create electricity. I guess it's a wonderful dream, but I really just prefer the wilderness as it is, don't you?
From Secure Bay, Malcolm heads further north to a small reef-locked island, 30 nautical miles from the mainland. At high tide, this is one of the best fishing spots on the coast. They pitch camp on a small coral beach, the only stretch of flat ground for miles around, and wait for the tide to change. In the shallows, blacktip reef sharks prowl impatiently. And with the tide come the fish, skimming just ahead of the sharks. High high tide on the reef is the best time for trolling.
Oh no! Ah, look at this! And that's what Kimberley fishing's all about. You try and catch yourself a feed, and these black-tipped reef sharks come in, and before you can get your dinner out of the water, you've got these sharks hanging on. I had a metre out of the water and he's still hanging on. A couple of bites, and there's not much left of a 10-kilo trevally. Sharks all around me now. So what I might do is I'll just throw this back into the water, and we'll give you a look at just what all these sharks can do.
The following day, the men head out again across the reef to the shark-infested waters.
Last night when I was lying in my swag, I was just thinking about all these sharks. You can see they're around the back of the boat already. Whenever you anchor and you've caught a couple of fish, a little bit of the blood runs out of the stern here and brings the sharks up very quickly. And I thought, what would happen if I fell in there? Perhaps nothing, but I'm sure if I had some sort of cut on me, these sharks would go into a feeding frenzy very quickly. So what I've done is tied a bag and a life jacket and an old pair of pants together with a couple of floats. I've placed a couple of fish inside, which, if you stretch your imagination a bit, it looks like me. So what I'm going to do is throw this over the back here and see what happens. It's all very quiet at the moment. I don't expect the sharks to rush straight in. Give it a couple of minutes and see what happens. Well, that was pretty scary. It puts me off swimming up here. I'm just going to pull it in, and I want to get my plastic bottle that was in the bottom of the pants. It's fallen out and taken off with the current, so I want to get it before I lose it.
With the fish on the bite, the men are reluctant to leave, and at sundown they're stranded. At midnight, they'll float off. But in the meantime, with a little ingenuity, Malcolm sets up the Primus burner well away from the fuel-laden boat and boils the billy. morning finds them again waiting for the tide. Malcolm calls this wait a while country, always waiting for the tide to come in or waiting for it to go out. The dorsal fin of a good-sized fish catches Malcolm's keen eye.
I only get a shot like that about once every 10 years up here. Always carry a hand spear. In a survival situation, they're essential. We're stuck on the reef here, waiting for the tide to come up. We may not get any fish today because we've got strong westerly winds, so we can eat this fish raw, and later on we can cook it. It's a beautiful eating fish. Just have a look at that wire. See how it bent it up? That's just almost too weak for this sort of fish, but I don't use these a lot. But when you need a feed, you can always pick a fish up with one of these if you practice a lot. You've got to really practice before you're any good with a hand spear. I learned how to use a hand spear up in Arnhem Land with the Aboriginal people in the early 1960s. Practice day after day, hour after hour. Always carry one on the boat. Don't use it a lot, but when you pick a feed up like that quickly, it's well worth it. When you're out on the islands and you got to camp overnight, there's not always much firewood. So you can just take a fillet off a fish. Just get rid of that skin there. Just take that skin off quickly, and you can just take a bit of fish and you can eat it raw. And it's tough, but it's sweet and very good for you. The Japanese are famous for eating raw fish, and if you really upmarket, you can bring some vinegar and a little bit of onion, which we still have in the boat. So, tell you what, that fish is nice. Now, chuck the onion in there, some vinegar, and we'll just marinate the fish, 15 minutes to a couple of hours, and it's very nice. You can do this in the boat too. If you're caught anywhere, anchor off at night, you can't get ashore, you catch yourself a fish, bit of vinegar, and it's not too bad. I'm just taking out these small pieces, dropping them in the vinegar and onion, and leave it there for a couple of hours, and it'll be very nice. I haven't got a lot of vinegar in there because we're out in the bush for quite a while. We don't want to waste it all, but that's only been in there for 3 or 4 minutes, and already the flesh is starting to turn white. Here it is, half an hour later. It's marinated, the flesh is nice and white, and it breaks apart, and it is beautiful and sweet.
At sunrise, Malcolm begins the long journey to a remote corner of the northern Kimberley, the Hunter River. Later, the boat passes the eroded rock formations that mark the river mouth. The pockets of rainforest here are the home of a rare snake that's never been filmed. A mate of Malcolm's, John Weigel, from the Australian Reptile Park in Gosford, has been trying to locate this snake for years. Malcolm is to rendezvous with John, who's walking overland.
John Weigel!
But there's no sign of John's party. Malcolm's hoping a shot from his Magnum will draw a response. Working with crocodiles permits him to carry a handgun in case of emergency. "48 hours later, there's still no contact. The pre-arranged plan was to meet here, but the men are now well overdue, and it's decided to search the next river system. Malcolm leaves a note to say he'll return in 3 days' time. It's possible John and his party might have reached the headwaters of the Roe, so on the rising spring tide, he motors as far as possible up the river. As the tide drops, there's a dramatic change. The water literally disappears, exposing huge boulders. Malcolm's in trouble. He could be stranded here for weeks, and John's party is depending on him.
We came up the river right to the top on the big tide yesterday afternoon, put the boat up here so we could have a good night's sleep. And during the night, the tides dropped off. Now the tides during the day are a lot higher, but I can tell you I'm a very worried man, because if we don't get the boat off here around about 1 o'clock this afternoon, we won't get out of here for 2 to 2.5 weeks. And it's that hot and it's that enervating. I'm not looking forward to waiting 2.5 weeks, and I'm very worried about the other guys that we're looking for at the moment.
It's decided to unload everything, including 600 litres of fuel, so the boat will float clear of the rocks when the tide does come in. The tides are dropping off, and if they don't get the boat down to the water's edge, they'll be stuck for days. A desperate attempt to manoeuvre the boat free on logs fails. high-frequency radio is moved to a rock face, well away from the boat, and contact is made with a helicopter on the Mitchell Plateau. The pilot offers to search for the men and get back to Malcolm within a day or two.
Yeah, we're getting you very faint, mate, but that's okay.
Would you like me to try and contact them? Do you think you might be out of range, over?
Very relieved, he heads off for a feed of fresh fish.
I've just walked up the gorge to where the salt water and the fresh water meet. Whenever you find a spot like this at the top of any of these Kimberley rivers, it's usually a really top place to catch a fish. Very few people come up to these places, so the type of lure doesn't really matter because the fish are uneducated. I've just got a little homemade wooden cedar lure here, green and black. Drop it on, go down there, and I reckon I could get a couple of beautiful jack for lunch, just below that waterfall there.
His first catch is an undersized barramundi, so he lets it go. Almost every cast brings in a nice pan-sized mangrove jack.
The best way to cook your fish out here in the bush is straight onto the coals, but no flame. The flames will cook it, burn it, give it an awful taste. Don't scale the fish. You can gut it if you like. Straight onto the coals there. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can use the aluminium foil, which we do at home on the Sunday barbie. Lie it out. This way, if you cook it in the foil, gut it, because the skin is very nice cooked this way. Just straight in there, the way we do it at home. Just straight on the coals. Leave it for 10 minutes and it's just beautiful. Mangrove jack is just about my favoured fish, probably even better than barra when they're fat. That is just so sweet because it was fat when I caught it. A fish that is skinny, in other words, when you gut it, if it hasn't got any fat in it, it won't taste any good. It's got lots of fat in it, which this one did. It'll have plenty of juice in it and it'll be very sweet.
The following day comes the news they've been waiting for. The helicopter pilot has picked up John Weigel and his team. Everyone's relieved and excited to have finally made contact.
Just keep away from the water. Beautiful too. So what actually happened, John, from last Tuesday to when we've met this morning?
Well, Malcolm, we tried to, according to our plan, walk across the plateau from Mitchell Falls all the way to the Hunter, but wasn't more than about a day's hike, and we found out that the country was much rougher than we thought. We went gorge over gorge over gorge. After one day's hike, we'd only traversed 5 kilometers. We made the decision it was better to turn back and try and get a helicopter in to meet up with you on schedule.
There you go. If we don't get that boat off today, we're going to be here for 9 days.
We?
Yeah, well, you can't move.
For hours, everyone, including the chopper pilot, pitches in, picking up timber to slide the boat out.
You're going to cook no, I'm not. You're a pilot. No, I'm not really. Yep, down here.
In the deep gorge, it's hot, exhausting work.
I'll take it. Just hang on to the end. Slow and steady. Right. Watch your leg, John. We'll drop it. Right. Protect it. Righto, position your feet on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. No, that's not right, Dad. Oh, I got an inch. Righto. Breather. 1, 2, 3.
The boat's gradually edged into position, ready to manoeuvre it out on the rising tide later in the day. It has to be moved at least 20 metres before there's any chance of it floating.
Stop it. Ready to take off. You want to just sort out these ropes? Angle hook on there. I'll just check it, Doug. You can't go any further.
After so much effort, the boat's in danger of sliding stern first into the mud, so the anchor's wedged behind a rock.
Hang on, I'll get those. That's it. Can you go towards me now? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, he's ready to fly. We got him.
With the boat now ready for reloading, the pilot heads back to base, and the men can concentrate their efforts on looking for the elusive rough-scaled python. Next morning, everyone's relaxed as they head for a particular pocket of rainforest where they'll search once again for the snake, so rare that an adult specimen has never been seen alive. For years, on his annual holidays, John Weigel has been scouring the rainforest, hoping to find this unique reptile.
Now, what's your program for the next week or so, John?
Well, we're going to have a good look in this rainforest patch here. This is one of the best patches of rainforest in the whole Kimberley. And that's the reason we're up here, really, is because the fauna in this rainforest area of the Kimberley is absolutely unique. A lot of the reptiles we're going to see have never been described. Some of them have been described only in the last 5 years to science. But the one we're going to look for in particular is the rough-scale python.
And that's why I've come up, isn't it? Because this particular python you're looking for has never been filmed or never been photographed. Well, that's not quite right. Didn't you find one last year?
We found a juvenile last year and photographed it, a nice little baby. But I still haven't seen an adult rough-scale python in the flesh. No rough-scale's been filmed before, and this will be our ideal opportunity. The climatic conditions are good. This rainforest looks terrific, and we'll give it a good shot.
Days are spent combing the vine thickets, hoping to turn up any evidence of snakes. Trent spots something in a deep crevice.
He's hang on to you, has
He's
he?
got a good hold.
It's a
Very
giant
strong.
cave gecko, a very aggressive lizard with a savage bite.
Oh, he got strong jaws.
Hey, John! He's got a cave gecko here!
Oh, that's better.
One of the largest geckos in Australia. It's found only in the northern Kimberley and western Arnhem Land.
Got a little
Foot on their tail.
matter of.
Now, what is that, John? That's
That's a.
The common tree snake is a harmless distraction from the search for the rough-scaled python.
You're really good climbers.
Mm.
Heading for that tree behind me.
How come these snakes can climb better than the others?
They're really well adapted for it. They have a keeled row. Finn puffs himself full of air. You'll never get him out in 100 years.
The Kimberley rock monitor is one of the most striking of all the goannas, with its distinctive body markings and exceptionally long tail. It flattens its body to hide in deep, narrow cracks in the rock. John calls it the Ferrari lizard because it's so fast and sleek.
Quite nice, nicely neatly into crevice.
Like much of the Kimberley fauna, there's very little known about this beautiful reptile.
The tail is nearly 3 times the length of the body, which makes it one of the. Got him?
Yep.
Is that what he is?
Yep, definitely Felicipator. Boy.
Another extraordinary animal is the fringe-toed velvet gecko. Recently discovered and described, it lives only in this remote northern Kimberley region.
Very calm, isn't it? Yeah, he doesn't seem to be that worried about the situation.
Well, we better put him back on.
Let's see what else we can find.
Late on the third night, the men are excited. Just for a few seconds when they thought they'd found the elusive rough-scaled python. But it's only a common species known as a children's python.
You've seen it doing this.
Its defense is to roll up into a tight ball and wait until the predator loses interest. All night and into the morning, the hunt goes on.
Rock-scale python! Where are you? We're going to the fig tree! Rock-scale python, I don't believe it! Oh, it's beautiful! Play the whistle again! Get Malcolm! Oh, I don't believe it!
Oh man, it's just not even gonna. Obviously, he's wait. Whoa! I tell you what.
Geez, he's not very happy.
I think he was.
The country is so rugged and so remote that in over 200 years of European settlement, this is the first time that this snake has ever been filmed alive.
I can't believe it. Rough scale python, hey? How many years have I been trying to get one of those?
Wow, feel those scales.
Okay, well we don't want to frighten him. But
I think
Go try and hold it there for Mitchell.
that's definitely a bird.
In a frightening display of aggression, the python reveals long, curved teeth. Previously known only from 2 dead specimens in the Western Australian Museum that were collected in the early 80s, herpetologists have been trying to find a live animal ever since. John Weigel believes that it lives in the rock crevices and hunts in the trees. The huge teeth and gaping jaws are perfectly adapted for grabbing birds and small mammals, such as native rats. Malcolm has been deliberately vague about the exact location of the snake. It's classified as rare and endangered, and there's always a concern that unscrupulous collectors will find specimens to smuggle out of Australia.
Defensively a minute ago. Calm down now.
Yeah. This is the first one that's ever been filmed, isn't it?
This is the
This
first
size.
film of a rough-scale python.
I'll give this back to you, I think.
This is the, I would say this is the Kimberley ecological equivalent to the green tree python. I'll bet you these blokes are living most of their life in the trees and ambush feeding birds and rats and so on that come into these fruit trees. God, it's beautiful, isn't it? Very, very rough to touch, very keeled scales. This is the only python in the world with keeled scales. Very unique part of the Kimberley rainforest fauna, and I've been looking for this fella for years. This is my holy grail. Yeah,
Non-venomous, pythons constrict their prey to death.
tail tip.
What I can't work out, John, is how it's taken so long to find this snake.
I'll tell you what. I've been coming up here. This is about the 10th trip to the northern Kimberley for me. And apart from that little juvenile that my offsider Trent found last year, along with me, this is the first one I've seen.
But why can't you collect a few of these and start a captive breeding program for them so we can learn a lot more about them?
Well, I think an application needs to be lodged to do just that. I think the zoological community in Australia needs to get onto animals like this. These are unique components of our fauna. And a lot can be learned. I mean, that behavior we just saw with that defense, which we just filmed, that has never been reported in anything like this before. That's completely new. There you go.
Now, what would this animal be eating?
Oh, birds. Look at the length of those teeth.
Because of those huge teeth?
Yeah, that gets through the feathers. This is, now that I've seen one, an adult, I can tell you it's just ecologically got to be similar to a green python. It's got the same huge bulbous jowls, very tall head to accommodate those long teeth, and that's to get through the feathers and grab those birds.
Well, what do you think? A few still photos? And let him go?
This is going to be the most photographed python in Australia,
and then
we'll let him go.
Procedure, doesn't it? No. I'll tell you what. See where he goes.
John reluctantly releases the snake that's been his obsession for so long. Within the hour, Malcolm begins the long run back to Broome, and John and his mates fly out of the wilderness, heading back to Sydney. Malcolm's keen to get amongst the fighting barramundi on the other side of the Kimberley, north from Wyndham. In part 2 of Kimberley Adventure, Malcolm reaches the Berkeley River, where the mighty barramundi are on the bite. He travels through spectacular gorges, spends weeks attempting to reach the tidal rush at Talbot Bay. Meets up with colourful Kimberley wildlife. Watches a kilometre-long waterfall form as the huge tides drop off, and experiences the danger of the rushing, rising tide. Be sure to watch Kimberley Adventure Part 2 with Malcolm Douglas.
It was early in 1964 that David Oldmeadow and Malcolm Douglas gave up their jobs to travel Australia. The dogs shared the excitements and dangers of the trip. Suve is dead. Scruffy survives. Climbing into the front seat is Malcolm, who came to boarding school in Australia from the phosphate island of Nauru. He left school to join a wool firm, working on the big outback stations, and later becoming a stock agent in the bush. Malcolm and David originally planned to be away for 12 months. The 12 months stretched into 4 years, always moving on, looking for new adventures. How does such a journey begin? They bought a Land Rover, spent 12 weeks fitting it out and buying equipment. On a cold winter day in June, they left Melbourne behind and headed north. Many city dwellers must long to do the same. For most, it would be better to share David's and Malcolm's experiences through this film. This remarkable film deals with the last 12 months of this journey, showing areas that few people have ever seen. From Darwin to Cape York, through little-known Arnhem Land, around the Gulf of Carpentaria, then up the Cape York Peninsula to the very tip of Australia. Malcolm Douglas and David Oldmeadow take you across the top.
Darwin, capital of the Northern Territory, one of the fastest growing cities in Australia. The port of Darwin, busy wharves on the edge of a tropical harbour. Nearby, the Methodist Mission supply boat has been beached for repairs. On the incoming tide, we climb aboard, ready for our trip along the Arnhem Land coast. Leaving the harbour, we sail out into Clarence Strait, heading for Van Diemen's Gulf and the Arafura Sea. The boat is manned by a captain and crew of full-blood Aborigines. They carry supplies to isolated mission stations along the coast of Arnhem Land. These settlements support about 3,000 Aborigines. 2 days out from Darwin, conditions are good with only slight seas running. Days and nights of this, and we reach Milingimbi. Supplies are unloaded, and we disembark. Suva and Scruffy have had quite enough of the sea. They're anxious to get ashore. For Dave and me, this is our second trip to the island. Old friends are here to meet us. Milingimbi is situated on one of the Crocodile Islands, 3 miles from the mainland. It's a mission caring for about 700 Aborigines. They camp beneath giant tamarind trees, which grew from seeds left here hundreds of years ago by traders from Macassar and the Celebes. Under the biggest tamarind tree, a group of Aborigines from the mainland is camped. One of these is Malangi. He should be famous, yet few people know of his existence. Malangi painted the design for Australia's $1 note. Malangi is the only adult male left in the Manurnu tribe. Each tribe has its own ceremonies and totems, and only the fully initiated men are permitted to paint these symbolic designs. In 1963, Mr. Carol Kupka of the Paris Museum visited Arnhem Land to study Aboriginal art. He collected a number of paintings, including some by Malangi. Mr. A.C. Macpherson of the Reserve Bank of Australia saw these paintings in Paris, and one of Malangi's was brought back to Australia. Eventually, it was chosen for the new $1 note. Some people say that Malangi's style has been influenced by Western art, but Malangi has spent most of his life in the bush. He's had little contact with Europeans. Malangi takes a few draws on a longi, a style of pipe introduced to the Aborigines hundreds of years ago by the traders from Macassar. Here, Malangi paints the story of the death of a great hunter, the original guardian spirit of the Manurnu tribe. That's the hunter in the center of the bark. He's been away all day hunting. He's caught goannas, emu, and wallaby, and he's collected wild fruit and yams. He camps beside a waterhole, lights a fire, and throws the wallaby cut into pieces onto the fire to cook. A snake slithers out of the long grass, strikes, and the hunter dies. The figures squatting around the hunter are members of the tribe, singing the story of the great spirit hunter and how he met his end. When Malungi finishes his painting, I show him a $1 note, and he explains the story to me. This legend of the original guardian spirit being bitten by a snake and dying is always sung today when a member of the Manurnu tribe dies. This old woman, her face distorted by the dread disease leprosy, waits patiently for the end. Days later, she is dead. Dave and I, because we've been accepted by the tribe, are allowed to watch and share the people's grief. The dead woman's relatives keep up a continuous wailing and throw themselves on the ground. A blanket covers the dead woman and her closest relative, a sister. The grief-stricken sister appears for a drink of water, and the wailing goes on. The husband shows his anger and drives the evil spirits from the camp. He believes these spirits caused his wife to die. All day, all night, the mournful wailing continues. The men gather and begin the long death ceremonies. These Aborigines believe that when a person dies, the spirit leaves the body and returns to the sacred tribal waterhole. Each tribe has its own waterhole somewhere in Arnhem Land. When the initial shock of the death is over, preparations are made to help the spirit on its journey. Age-old dances mime the wanderings of the soul to its final resting place, the sacred waterhole where the tribe actually keeps its sacred totems and ceremonial objects. And when the spirit finally reaches the waterhole, it assumes the identity of one of the sacred totems, usually a fish or an animal. These totems are now being painted on the bodies of the ceremonial dancers. The people believe that if they fail to give the spirit the correct farewell, it'll return and cause trouble. The tribe's sacred waterhole is symbolized on this man's body. This must be done so that the ancestors of the deceased know the correct waterhole to guide the spirit to after its wandering. The paint is white clay mixed with water. The brush, a piece of stick chewed at the tip. Here, ritual objects are prepared for the dancers. It takes all day to paint the intricate designs on the bodies of the dancers, and finally, their faces are whitened with clay. Spray painting in its oldest form. Backstage, the men receive their final instructions. They dance at sunset, and within minutes, the artistic designs on their bodies are washed away with perspiration. Leaving the preparation area, which is forbidden to women and children, the men move into the main camp where everyone can watch. The dancers stir up the imaginary waters of the waterhole, chasing the catfish. They mime the actions of all the animals associated with the age-old rites. And so the old woman's spirit is led to its resting place with song and dance. Leaving Milingimbi, we head for Nungalala on the Australian mainland. Scruffy and Suva have to travel steerage. The natives are afraid of them, and Suva doesn't like it one bit. Nungalala is situated on the edge of the vast Arafura swamp. That's it, marked in green. This is one of the most remote areas in the whole of Australia. The Arafura swamp is only part of Arnhem Land. It's a huge area of wild country set aside for those Aborigines who still prefer to live a tribal way of life. These semi-nomadic people are the ones Dave and I are going to live with for the next 5 months. The camp at Nungalala is just a scattered collection of bark huts. The population varies from 20 to 80, depending on the season. It's the end of the day and the women are arriving back in camp after collecting firewood. That 4-gallon drum is full of water. It weighs at least 40 pounds. Each man has a number of wives and many children. And although these people are now Australian citizens with the right to vote, they speak no English and have little understanding of white civilization. When this baby is a young man, his tribal life will be gone, and this film will become a record of a lost way of life. This couple is exceptional. One man, one wife. The husband, Rachi, has been promised other brides, but he gave them away to his brothers. He's devoted to his first wife. As they sit together, she twists strips of banyan bark into bush string. It's very strong, and Rachi will use it in his fishing nets, his spears, and totems, and she'll use it for making baskets. Rachi carves a goanna, a lizard. He'll sell this to the mission, which will send it with other totems to a tourist shop somewhere in Australia. Rachi and his wife will use the money to buy commodities introduced by the white man, such as guns, torches, and fishing lines. Napupu weaves a dilly bag. She'll use it to carry her belongings and for collecting food, wild fruit and berries. A cheerful soul, though she suffers dreadfully from sore eyes caused by sleeping too close to the smoking campfires. Commotion in the camp. A python has just been killed and Jungle Bali becomes a teacher. He calls the children together and explains that this snake is not poisonous. It can be eaten. The python is not eaten raw, though, so the children are giving a lesson in fire making. First, take a loose ball of bark fibre, put it on the ground, hold it in place with a strip of softwood. The softwood has been slightly grooved in one place. The fire maker puts a hardwood stick into the hollow and rotates the stick quickly. In a matter of seconds, the dust from the softwood begins to smoulder and overflows onto the bark fibre beneath. The fibre is picked up smouldering and then gently coaxed into flame. And there it is, homemade fire in 30 seconds. And once the fire is good and hot, the snake and a long-necked tortoise can be tossed onto it. Aborigines cook their food very quickly and eat it almost raw. With a genuine bark tablecloth and a hand for a knife and a foot for a fork, it's time to tuck into hot, steaming snake. Rachi says there are plenty of fish in the river, and somehow this appeals more than snakes, so we decide to try and catch them. Rachi tells us that the barramundi will be spawning in the overflow from the wet season, and so towards the top of the river, the boys and I organise the net. Dave motors to the very beginning of the river, where the noise of an outboard is heard for the first time. He turns around and watches for signs of the fish. There they are, their dorsal fins breaking the surface. The boys and I anchor the net securely to the banks and in midstream to stop the strong current, ripping it away. We head upstream and plunge in amongst the fish to drive them into the net. Now, what's for dinner? Just look at that, a great stack of barramundi. These are the most delicious fish in the north. They're caught in freshwater and in salt, although the freshwater fish are inclined to taste a little muddy. While we're at Nangalala, the government sends in a helicopter to assist with the preliminary surveys of the swamp. From the air, we can assess the potential of the area far more quickly. It's a strange feeling to look down on vast areas of Australia still unexplored and quite unknown. It's a fantastic natural sanctuary for the birds. Below, you can see the main tidal river near our camp. It twists and winds far back into the unknown interior. Dave and I intend to explore this river by boat. And then the helicopter crashes. Luckily, we're not on board for this flight. The pilot on another survey trip strikes trouble and force lands. We make up a search party, and 24 hours later we find the wreckage. But the pilot's gone. Dazed and injured, he's staggered off into the bush. 12 hours later, we find him wandering, lucky to be alive. And we are too. There's a hole in the cockpit made by a rock, and that's just where we would have been sitting. Dodi, the bark painter, is one of the searchers. And while he's in this new area, he decides to get some bark before returning to camp. Dodi inspects many trees before he finds a suitable one. The bark must be full of sap, otherwise it'll split as it's removed. He places a forked branch against the trunk, climbs up, and cuts the bark high above the ground. Finally, a stick is used to lever the bark completely free from the trunk. Deciding on the best section to use, he cuts it free. Now the long walk back to Nangalala. After heating the bark over a fire and keeping it flat with stones for several days, he begins. Dodi is the leader of the Wagalug myth. The Wagalug myth is the story of two sisters and their children as they journeyed through Arnhem Land in the dream time. Dodi paints a yellow ochre line. It represents the faraway land from whence the Wagalug sisters came. Dodi the painter uses yellow and red ochre, white clay and black charcoal. these are the only colours used in bark painting. As he needs them, the colours are ground on a stone and mixed with water. He treats the bark with the juice of wild orchids. This stops the dried ochre from flaking off. But to get on with the legend, the Wagalug sisters travelled through Arnhem Land, naming the rivers, the mountains, the jungles and billabongs. And these places are still sacred to the Aborigines to this very day. Eventually the sisters camped beside a billabong. And then a great snake, Ulungur, slithered out of the water and swallowed the women and children. The snake can be seen encircling the 4 figures on the bark. Ulungur became very sick, reached and spat out the women and children onto the ground, where they turned into stones. And these stones are still there and may be seen today. As he finishes the painting, Dodie paints in the rays of the sun. It takes Dodie a week to finish this painting, and then we sit together and he tells me how the Wagalug men, missing their women and children, set out for Arnhem Land in search of them. They discovered the blood-covered stones and they knew that something terrible had happened. That night, as the men were asleep, the spirits of the Wagalug women came to them and taught them all the sacred songs and rituals. The women told the men that they must circumcise their sons as a sign of manhood, a custom which is still practiced today. And at Nungalala, Dave and I witnessed one of these sacred initiation ceremonies for ourselves. These 2 boys are being prepared for the ceremony which will take them from the status of women to the status of men. They are to be made men of the tribe. From the ages of 12 to 14, all boys go through a period of intensive instruction in the myths and beliefs of the tribe. Before the actual ceremony, the totemic designs of the tribe are painted on the boys' bodies. Dave and I spent so much time with these people, we were allowed to witness these extraordinary rites. The ritual area of the camp is cleared and the final dances begin. Over the next hour or so, the tension mounts towards a frightening and unforgettable experience, even to an onlooker. Fear on the faces of the boys. The singers and didgeridoo players begin their final songs. The dancers move in, surging around the initiates. The boys are placed on top of their uncles and pinned in position. The men cry out to help the boys bear the pain and prevent the women from hearing the screams. Once, a sharp shell was used. Today, it's a razor blade. The men crowd in around the doctor. You see, it's taboo for the women to watch. The circumcision over, the boys are rushed back to the men's ground, where many taboos are placed on them. They're not allowed to speak for weeks. They must not eat many types of food, and to look at women is forbidden. The bleeding is stopped by placing a heated leaf from a particular tree over the wound. The leaf stops infection and promotes healing. The tension over, the proud doctor takes a drink of water from a paper bark vessel. With the ceremonies over, the dry season ahead, the men prepare to go walkabout. The main preparation is the making of spears. The shafts are long jungle saplings which the men heat over the fire and straighten while they're still hot. Jungle Bali uses his powerful jaws to complete the job. These men intend to walk from Nungalala to the Arafura Billabong, where a number of their relatives are hunting crocodiles. Remember that river we saw from the helicopter? Dave and I plan to get to the headwaters by boat and then walk across to meet the tribe. This should take only 3 or 4 days using the outboard motor. Aborigines approach in a dugout canoe. They're hunters from Milingimbi. Shortly before our arrival, they had killed the biggest crocodile in living memory. We were staggered by its size. It's gigantic. Never had anyone seen such a monster as this. Even the old men say it's the largest croc ever seen in this region. And it takes 10 men to drag the monster from the water to a clearing where it can be skinned and butchered. Skinning a huge crocodile like this is a major operation. Years ago, the skin had no value, but today it'll be sent to Darwin, where there are good prices, $140 for this one. The men shot this croc with an old wartime .303 as it was sleeping on the riverbank, and then they harpooned it as it slid into the water and pulled it back to shore and finished it off with an axe. Such massive jaws. Crocodiles of this size are a menace to cattle. And here you can see its tremendous size. The hunters are more interested in the meat than in the skin, and more care is taken when the carcass is butchered. The backbone is removed, exposing the stomach, heart, lungs, and intestines. Considerable time is spent looking for a small hormone sac amongst the fatty tissues near the stomach. They tell us that this provides a juice which stops infection when applied to wounds. Now the heart and intestines. The natives dote on the stomach lining just as tripe lovers enjoy their tripe, but with this there are no onions. The meat is divided up according to the position in the tribe. The more important members get the best cuts. 5 hours later, the crocodile is nothing more than a blubbery lump of meat. The skin is rolled up, ready to be sent by canoe back to Milingimbi Mission for sale to dealers in Darwin. And we continue up the river. Towards the top of the river, conditions deteriorate. Half-submerged logs and floating debris from the last wet season make travelling very difficult. At last, the head of the river. The water's too shallow to continue any further. The river is still tidal, though we are many miles from the sea, so we unload our gear and store it well above the high water mark. It's a long walk from here to the Arafura Billabong. You know, few white men have ever been this way. But we were here 2 years ago, and the Aborigines showed us the way across the hills and through the swamps. And this time, we hope to find our own way. The smoke ahead, which means the men from Nungalala are not far away. They burn the country as they travel to make it easier for walking on their return. The sheer weight of that pack, more than 100 pounds, begins to tell on Dave. A snake. These add to the hazards. Now Suva joins the party. Both these dogs attack snakes without fear, and only instinct protects them. One bite and either dog would die just as quickly as Rastus. Our first dog died in 1965. The fight's over, and Suva rejoins Dave as he begins looking for a campsite. Evening comes, and with it, chilly mists and vicious mozzies, and we roll in close to the glowing fire and the pest-proof smoke. The swamp people have heard we are coming. They've left a newly made dugout canoe on the bank of the Arafura Billabong. Dave and I paddle precariously to the other side. And there they are, waiting. These people are really the last Australian Aborigines living as a tribe on their tribal land. And even so, civilization has caught up with them. They wear a few clothes, and the young men carry rifles more often than spears. Their few possessions are purchased on the occasional trips to the mission to trade. Bundalil is a hunter. He tells Dave about a piece of steel he's just acquired and how he intends to make himself a new fish spear. The handkerchief on his head and his singlet are always clean. Every morning he bathes and washes his clothing in the nearby Billabong. Dorichinini has a bag full of tortoises for his relatives back at Nungalala. Tortoise is the best food the swamp has to offer, so he says, but I'm not so sure. This little girl is terribly shy. She's had practically no contact with civilization. It's an old bush saying that where there are goannas, you'll never find snakes. Perhaps this is why. Dave just shot this goanna, and inside there's a snake as long as your arm. Dave gives the goanna to Nulmama. He's delighted. Goanna's a real delicacy here, and it's soon sizzling on the fire. There's not much fat on most bush animals, but these goannas have a thick layer of yellow fat on each side of the tail. The Aborigines really go for this in a big way. One of the most interesting reptiles in the swamp is the file snake. It gets its name from a very rough skin which resembles a rasp or file. The file snake lives in the water. It's tremendously active and swims at a great rate. But put it on land and it loses all control of its movements. It isn't venomous and if handled gently makes no attempt to bite. But treated roughly, it can turn quickly and inflict a nasty wound with its large teeth. How do you catch a file snake? Come with us and share an amazing experience. On the way to the Billabong, Nulmama spears a goanna. And then, through the tall swamp grass, we come across a backwater covered with water hyacinth. The men wade in and drive the snakes towards the bank. The reptiles panic, and as they try to double back, they are grabbed by the swamp people. A startled fish leaps. These billabongs are infested with crocodiles. Just before I shot this film, we saw a big one slide into the water, but no one here seems to care. Milparoo grabs a tortoise. And the drive goes on regardless of crocodiles and fallen trees. To kill a file snake, the jaws must be held tightly closed to stop it biting as its spine is snapped. This boy is one of the few Aboriginal children left learning the old ways of survival. He copies everything his father does. As the snakes and tortoises are caught, they're quickly killed to prevent their escape. And after the morning's hunt, snake and tortoise is naturally the main course for dinner. Tortoise, rich in protein, is always cooked in the shell. This is the one that got away. After the hunt, the men rest while the women do the cooking. Tortoise meat is white and oily, but after long periods in the bush, it tastes delicious. The afternoon is spent sleeping, and later in the day, the croc hunting begins. Hunting crocodiles from a dugout canoe using harpoons is a highly skilled art, and only the most capable hunters are successful. Milparoo is the best, but it's a team effort, and he'd be lost without his paddler, G'day G'day. Milparoo sees a croc and signals directions to his paddler. The paddler, often unable to see the crocodile, works only by signs. He must be accurate and silent. Milparoo drives the harpoon home, aiming for the back of the skull, the center of the nervous system. It's still very aggressive, and G'day G'day takes no chances and bails out when it attacks him. Milparoo tires it out before pulling it into the canoe the second time. And even if the croc is exhausted now, G'day G'day is still nervous. He hesitates before going ashore. In 3 weeks, these 2 men caught 18 crocs, worth $800. Dave shot this one near the camp. When a crocodile is shot, it sinks straight to the bottom. After 36 hours, it floats to the surface, and the skin is still valuable if taken straight from the decaying body. This one stinks, and it's a case of move the croc or move the camp. Diriginini thinks I'm mad going to so much trouble pulling the croc onto high ground, but my idea is to build a hide nearby and film the birds feeding on the carcass. By moving into the hide before dawn and waiting, not even the crows are aware of my presence. And then the hawks arrive, driving the crows away. And as the sun comes up, things really begin to hum. In this climate, what with the heat, the maggots, the birds, and the insects, a carcass disappears in no time. And this is all that's left after 5 days.